individuals who actually do show for their court date.
I want to thank you for your information. I think the other side is very particular because this doesn't point very good to them. So I yield back.
Congressman Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Kafari, your duty under the Inspector General Act is to immediately report flagrant and serious abuses that are taking place. You were aware, at least as early as May of 2021, that the Secret Service had erased thousands of text messages that were sent before and during the January 6th violent attack on the Capitol, the Congress, and the Vice President. But you failed to notify Congress for 14 months, for a year and 2 months, that the Secret Service was refusing to comply with your requests for information. So why didn't you immediately report, as you're statutorily bound to do, these serious and flagrant failures to answer your questions about the disappearance of thousands of texts that were sent during January 6th?
Just so the record's clear, Congressman, we were not informed by the Secret Service on the date that you described in 21. In fact, at no time in 21 were we informed that Secret Service had deleted and was no longer able to retrieve text messages on cell phones owned by the Secret Service.
So when did you become aware of that?
In February, I believe, of 2022.
Well, we have documents showing that just 6 weeks after the initial request for documents from the Secret Service, you canceled requests to the Secret Service for phone records and text messages. Why did you do that?
If I recall correctly, and I mentioned during my prepared remarks here, DHS was delaying or denying us access to relevant information.
Did you report that to Congress at that point, or ask for a report to Congress?
I was working with the senior leadership of the department to free up or to pry loose information that the department was withholding from us. In fact, I met with the Secretary of Homeland Security in about September or October of 21, explained to him that we were having delays in getting information. And the Secretary saw fit to publish a memo in which he directed all the employees in the department to cooperate with our office. We subsequently received a tranche of documents from the department. They were basically emails that we had been waiting for 8 months to receive. I think there were about 700,000 emails.
Yeah. Well, what I don't understand is your office revived the request that you nullified 6 weeks after originally making it. 5 months later, in December of 2021, is what the paper trail reveals. But what I don't understand is your statutory duty to immediately inform Congress about this flagrant abuse. I mean, we're talking about the worst violent insurrection against Congress in the history of the United States, and the Secret Service is not cooperating with your request for information. Why did you not think that you needed to immediately alert Congress to that fact?
I was working with senior leadership in the Department of Homeland Security to get the records we were lawfully entitled to receive. They were also, the department was also under 4 preservation notices by congressional oversight committees last Congress. And to my knowledge, the department never informed Congress that itself had deleted the messages, nor were they ever asked.
But that's the role of the Inspector General. That's why we have an Inspector General. Look, in June of 2022, you published your semi-annual report where there was going to be a reference to the Secret Service's obstruction of this investigative path, and you removed that. Why was the reference to the Secret Service's obstruction deliberately deleted from the June 22nd semi-annual report of the Inspector General?
I believe our first notification to Congress was in the fall of 21. In our semi-annual report, where we described the delays the department was doing to us and prohibiting us from receiving requested information.
Well, did you sign off on the decision to remove this reference from the report?
I don't know when that reference was.
In June 2022, there was going to be a reference to Secret Service's obstruction of questioning about the disappearance of the texts, and that was deliberately removed. Did you sign off on that deliberate removal?
I signed off on the removal, and I signed a letter specifically to the January 6th Oversight Committee and to this Oversight Committee.
But
at
why
the
did
same
you
time.
remove it?
Your time has expired. I'm going to say something here. I think what's going on the border is the biggest crisis this country has to deal with today. And it's not surprising that when the number of people coming into this country is increased by a factor of 11, it would have a tremendous impact on the morale of the Border Patrol. I realize Mr. Dr. Kafari was originally appointed by Donald Trump, and some people are never going to get over that. But our focus today should be on what's going there. We could have a million hearings on the southern border, but today we're going to focus on the morale of the Border Patrol and what effect this increase by a factor of 10, the number of people coming across has. And I've been down on the border many times. I can assure you, if you go down there, the Border Patrol agents will tell you all sorts of things. But in any event, next we have Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to also just add, I think the questions that have been asked so far in the statements on our side have been all within the scope of the hearing. I think that we're merely pointing out flaws and issues within the witness and the witness's statements. And so I just want to just add that I think that our line of questioning so far has been very reasonable within the scope of the hearing.
Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My. Inspector General Kafari, Joe Kafari, is one of the most honorable men I've ever met. I've had interactions with many in 7 years of congressional service to my country. He's a rare combination of experience and intellect and honor and principle. You always get a straight answer from Joe Kafari. Hope America's listening to him today. It's an attack after attack after attack from the left. The man's not looking at notes. He's responding from his head because he knows what's going on. It's no surprise that the Biden administration and my colleagues across the aisle don't like him, because he's an honorable man that speaks the truth. There's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth over there. The Democrats' issue with Inspector General Kafari is that he's an actual investigator, he's not a political hack, and he speaks the truth. Here's the problem, though, that my colleagues launching these attacks against this good man face. Joe Kafari is a principled man, and he deals with personal attacks against him like something stuck to the bottom of his boot. Inspector General Kafari, you've been accused of conducting your survey. You surveyed over 9,000 agents, is my understanding. Our colleagues managed to leave that out. They act like you talked to 28 people. Over 9,000 agents participated. And in your report that you provided, you go on to attest to the quality of the survey, which essentially, amazing to America watching, you came to the conclusion that these border agents that have been tasked with dealing with the disintegration of our sovereignty at the southern border, they've been moved from all across the country to work the southern border, taken away from their primary law enforcement role to do housekeeping and social work. Your survey came to the conclusion, amazingly, that there's a problem with morale. But they're folding themselves in half over there, trying to impugn you as a man. They're getting nowhere. America's watching. Let me ask you about these deployments, Inspector General Kafari. employments from across the country down to the southern border, where agents were moved from where they lived and worked, where their family is, where their kids go to school, to go down to the southern border. Were those deployments voluntary or were the agents ordered?
In certain cases, according to the agents and other employees of the department who were deployed, they were voluntary, and in others, they were voluntold to go.
So could you clarify what that means? I know what it means. I'm a veteran, an Army veteran, I was a cop for 12 years. I mean, you get volunteered. Your chain of command tells you, yeah, we need you to volunteer for this. So these guys are deployed for quite some time in incredibly difficult circumstances. They love their country. They're serving their country. By and large, they concur. But the longer they stay down there, the more it impacts themselves, their family, their morale, the esprit de corps of their units. I think it's obvious that this system of moving people down there has been detrimental to the health and well-being of our agents. It's concerning that agents are not performing their primary law enforcement roles. America's largely under the impression that we're moving border agents down there to enhance law enforcement. Is that the roles that these agents are primarily performing, Mr. Kafari?
The role that they were hired to do and the performance of their duties is to do law enforcement, at least for the Border Patrol and the 1811 criminal investigators who were deployed there.
But what role are they actually performing down there?
They're doing some law enforcement, but they're also providing care and welfare services to the detained and those individuals who they're processing.
Thank you, Inspector General. Thank you for your service. God bless you, sir. Stand strong. My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Congressman Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kafari, first let me say that I've been on this committee for 22 years and have been involved in dozens and dozens and dozens of investigations, from 20-something trips to Afghanistan, over 20 to Iraq, Ukraine. There has been no member on this committee currently that has done more investigations and involved in this type of work longer than I have, and I'm honored to do it. Mr. Kafari, I do want to say that our relationship with the inspectors general has, during that 22 years that I've been on this committee, has been a partnership. We rely heavily on our inspectors general to cooperate with us. It's been a good relationship and I've dealt with probably 3 to 4 dozen different inspectors general over that 22 years, and I've been proud to do it. I have to say that based on the evidence I have before me, our relationship with you is different. It is different. We have not had the cooperation and the relationship of trust that we have had with other inspectors general. We have not had that with you, and I regret that. I don't diminish your service to your country or any other capacity. I'm just talking about the facts of what has happened and what's going on. Are you familiar with the Project on Government Oversight?
Yes.
Okay, so the Project on Government Oversight is a nonpartisan, independent, nonprofit group that we have worked with for more than the 22 years I've been here. I think they started in 1980. And they have been nothing short of honest and forthright, and I've worked with them in Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. And sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't, but they have always been straightforward, regardless of whose administration was in power at that time. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Project on Government Oversight urging the President of the United States to remove Inspector General Joseph V. Kafari from his position with the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General.
Okay.
Mr. Kafari, are you currently, another group that we work with very closely and continue to is the Council of Inspectors General. And they're a group that not only does their own independent work, but also polices other inspectors general. Am I correct in saying that you are currently under investigation by the Council of Inspectors General on integrity and efficiency? Is that correct, Mr. Kafari?
You're correct, Mr. Lynch.
What is the basis of that investigation? Could you share that with us?
I'm uncertain, since I'm under investigation, if I can share that in a public setting. I'd be happy to discuss it with you.
Well,
Private.
they've made it public, so I'm not sure how private this is. There are several allegations. One, as the ranking member of this full committee indicated, was your failure to promptly notify Congress of crucial information on the Secret Service erasure of text messages related to the January 6th attacks on this Capitol. That did happen. And I witnessed Republicans and Democrats running for their lives. So anybody who says that did not happen, let's just disabuse that notion. But the relationship of trust that we have had with our inspectors general have not been continued. I want to yield my remaining time to the ranking member.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Oh,
The time is up.
Yeah, I get it.
yep, go ahead, sir.
I got the lesson.
Okay.
Sorry.
Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your report states that frequent deployments to the southern border are affecting staffing levels at the northern border. This is an important issue to my home state of North Dakota. Businesses rely on customers from both sides of the Canadian-U.S. border. Commerce doesn't stop at 5 p.m. when CBP closes a port of entry. Crops still need to be planted. Substantial detours to operating facilities significantly raise costs. After years of shortened operational hours, CBP finally extended hours at 3 ports of entry in North Dakota on a trial basis. But these hours are only temporary while CBP evaluates vehicular traffic, which does not account for other ramifications, including the transfer of goods and services. Lawful economic access to the United States should not be based on volume. It is the government's basic duty to maintain the northern border. And drawing down at the northern border to beef up the southern border does not justify shutting down North Dakota's economic sector. DHS is not properly allocating resources, and we talk about these things in large dollar amounts, but I'm going to talk about what is actually in the grand scope of things a fairly insignificant one. However, it would be significant at the northern border. One of your reports highlights that ICE spent over $17 million for hotel space and services that largely went unused in 2021. Can you elaborate on how ICE managed to waste $17 million in taxpayer resources?
If you're speaking about the contract that was between DHS and the Endeavors Corporation,
I am.
the contract required a minimum number of beds to be available to ICE during certain periods. And those beds would be paid for regardless of whether a migrant was actually staying in the room, in the hotel room.
Were the beds ever used?
Not to my knowledge, no.
why was ICE able to use sole source contracting and not award a contract based on an open competitive process?
Because the question that you just asked relates to an ongoing matter, I'm not able to provide more sufficient information in this setting.
If the company had no experience, why were they awarded the contract over more experienced companies?
Again, Congressman, the same answer as before.
So my next question, there's an ongoing investigation, so hopefully somebody will be held accountable.
Sir,
Would $17 million help at the northern border?
I believe it would help anywhere.
I mean, we don't have the volume that they have on the southern border. Everybody understands that. But we also move a lot of products that a lot of people need. If you like bread, you like what goes on between North Dakota and Canada. If you like, to eat a hamburger, you care about what goes on in North Dakota and Canada. I'm just trying to understand where we end up and how we get to these places that we have these scenarios where we are paying for money. I mean, we've seen people all over the country, many in sanctuary cities, balk and revolt at the fact that we're moving migrants across and moving them out of a high density area into other places. When we're talking about, do we have any analysis at this point yet of what we're spending on hotel rooms and other facilities while we have $17 million worth of unused beds?
I believe, Congressman, we have an ongoing audit to look at the movement of migrants and what it's costing DHS to do that.
Thank you. I would just say, as we finish this off, that we have to figure out a better way to do this. We have at the same time, the level of frustration from my constituents that exists when we have unfettered access, whether it's ports of entry, whether it's between ports of entry, and the vast majority of illegal activity that is occurring. And at the same time, economic sectors for northern border communities are absolutely being crushed. And it started with COVID, and it started with vaccine mandates, and it started with and it finally ended with the United States being the last, essentially, country in the civilized world that lifted those mandates. And these are real world consequences. And when we talk about trust in government and talk about trust in these issues, when people see fentanyl flowing across the southern border, ports of entry, between ports of entry, we've had that debate 1,000 times. When we see people being released into the interior of the United States with court dates that don't exist for 5, 7, 9 years in advance, and I got a farmer from Grano, North Dakota that can't get across the border after 5 p.m. because we don't have the resources to do it. The frustration is real, and it exists all across the country, and exists as far away from the southern border as you could possibly be, which is North Dakota. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Moskowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The border's been a problem for a long period of time because Congress has failed to pass comprehensive immigration reform. It's not like this is a new issue. This is something that's been going on for decades here. It's been passed from one president to the next to the next. Is it possibly worse now? Well, that's what happens when you have a problem that you don't fix for 2 decades. The same people who talk about the border, it's not like they've come up with solutions. They complain to get on Fox News every day. But it's not like we're having solutions. And so I want to ask a couple of questions because I'm frustrated with Homeland as well. I mean, I have folks back home who were raped by their nanny. She spent 20 years in jail in Florida. And all the family wanted to know is that when she was released, what was going to happen. That's it. She was a victim. She had a right to know. And I had even on her behalf made connections with Homeland on this issue. We were told, don't worry, we will make sure the family knows if she's deported or if we're keeping her, whatever the story is. Guess what? None of it happened. The rapist was deported. Nobody knows what happened to her. She's not flagged in the system. And now that family, the girl, who's now a mother of 2, has to be worried about where her rapist is. And so I have a couple of questions because obviously there's complaints all around, whether it's Secret Service or ICE. You know, Homeland was founded 22 years ago or 20 years ago after a national emergency. It's got 22 agencies in it. I'm not going to list them all. They're all household names. Has Homeland become too big? Is it too big? Is it time to split Homeland up? Is it time to reform the bureaucracy?
Congressman, let me first say that you and I did have a discussion about the individual who was convicted of rape. And we discussed the Crime Victims' Rights Act, and the prosecutor should have complied with that. I hope that that information was helpful that I supplied to you.
Well, that's a whole nother issue because
Yes, sir.
quite frankly, the rapist had more rights than the victim.
Yes, sir. I agree with you. I will say that Homeland Security, as the third largest department in the federal government, is quite large. It was put together, as you described.
You're almost as big as DOD.
Yes, sir. We're number 3, right behind DOD and Health and Human Services. It perhaps may require a look by this committee or others, maybe the Committee on Homeland Security, to see sort of a look back to see if it's fulfilling the mission that it was intended to do. But that would be a decision for Congress and not for me as the Inspector General.
So you don't have any suggestions on potential reforms or opinions on whether you think the agency can still function with 22 agencies. I mean, I hear it's kind of like when all the agencies get together with the secretary, it's like the Knights of the Round Table. They each give 5-minute updates to the secretary and then the meeting's over.
I will share that from our experience of doing audits and inspections and even criminal investigations, that silos of information remain to this day in DHS, which is presenting a problem for effective management.
Yeah, so what I would like to hear is I'd like to hear solutions to problems rather than continuing to gaslight issues at Homeland or an INS or Customs and Border, whatever it is. And I don't hear any solutions. And I think it's quite time we start looking at reform at Homeland. I'll yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
Thank you. Mr. Kafari, in April 2022, I want to get back to something. The Nonpartisan Watchdog Project on Government Oversight, and this was mentioned by another member, broke a disturbing story that your office sought to censor findings of sexual harassment and misconduct at DHS. According to the draft report that we've obtained in the committee, 28,000 DHS employees were surveyed, and more than 10,000 of the 28,000 reported experiencing sexual harassment and misconduct in the workplace, yet the report was shelved. Mr. Kafari, did your report on the morale of CBP, which we've been discussing, consider the effects of sexual harassment on employees?
I'm sorry, ranking member, what's the question?
Did your report on the morale of CBP or ICE employees consider the effect of sexual harassment and misconduct? I think the answer to that is actually no. But would you agree that sexual harassment and misconduct are one factor that could actually impact morale?
It could be a factor, certainly.
Thank you. And yet it was not considered in that report. And so I just want to make that note. I also, with the remainder of my time, just want to note that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll discuss it later.
Mr. Sessions.
Chairman, thank you very much, Mr. Kafari. Dr. Kafari, welcome to the committee. I think it's interesting that our friends, rather than asking pertinent questions about what your ideas have been in writing, have been simply to attack you. I've been to the border top to bottom for a number of years and went back and saw firsthand the piles of equipment that still sit there waiting for the wall to be built. It was my understanding, this is not a question to you, but it's my understanding that was there to help the Border Patrol agents so that they were not overrun as they're being done now. It would allow them operational control of the border that would mean that they could then follow the political will. If we went from one president to another, we would effectively understand, I don't know about 100%, but a higher percentage of people who were coming in could control drug usage, could control people who might come to this country who were wanted or would be seen as wanting to harm our country. And these piles are still there, requiring the Border Patrol, as when I was there with our young chairman and our General Chairman Comer down in Yuma, where we were in a bus, there were 90 or so people from Cuba, men, one Border Patrol agent, one female Border Patrol agent whose job was to hustle and get her job done. And that was not to catch people that were running away. That was to hurry up and take them to processing, because her boss or her boss's boss was being held accountable for how long it took them to hustle to do their job, to take these people in rather than protecting our border. I am concerned that there is a staffing issue problem. We've spoken about it. You have today, with understanding how we protect this country. Seemingly, you're being attacked about your oversight after things have occurred rather than your ideas. We know the border's in trouble. We know that we have a problem with fentanyl, gotaways, drugs, people coming to this country, losing children, the government actually taking control of children and then losing them, them being let loose on the streets of Texas, Arizona, California. People in California seem to be happy with it. People in Arizona, I'll let them speak for themselves. But in Texas, it is causing a huge problem, so much so that our governor is transporting them where they want to go. Washington, D.C., New York City, Chicago, and now they're being attacked for doing what these people wanted. I want you to know this Congress views in the majority that you are doing your job, that you're being stretched to a political limit about reporting what is happening versus trying to toe the line of what this department wants to do. The Department of Homeland Security, including the Secret Service. You were, a few minutes ago, literally, they said you did not do your job in reporting to them. Have you ever offered to come and meet with the minority, which was then the majority? Were you ever asked to come meet with them?
I volunteered and I met with several members of this committee who are now minority members.
Well, I would say to my friend Congressman Lynch that if he feels like he's not getting what he needs from his vast service, which I am a friend of Stephen's and I appreciate him, I would encourage him to do that with this subcommittee, to write the same letter, to get an answer, because I view that this department is failing to protect its country, which is its core mission. Why it was established was not to let anybody come into this country, encourage them, wave them through, and then lose them from within the masses of millions that are coming. I'm concerned about rule of law. I'm concerned about the deaths. I'm concerned about even mid-sized cities receiving people who've come from a marketing organization of a cartel to distribute drugs all over this country. They are openly allowing this, and the Democratic Party is right there with this administration to allow it to happen. I want to thank you for taking time to be with us. I find you refreshing, but I also want you to know when our friends that are on the other side, the Democrat members of this committee, wish to correspond, I would encourage them to come and we'll get them the same answer rather than an answer that they don't like. Thank you very much. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I just hear you say that you offered to come and sit with members of the majority in the last Congress?
That's correct.
You did?
Yes.
And did you ever do that?
Yes.
With who?
Mr. Moskowitz, Ms. Porter,
Mr. Moskowitz was not in Congress last Congress.
I'm talking about this Congress.
I said last Congress. You said last Congress. He asked you last Congress, did you ever meet with the majority, Chairman Thompson, Chairman Maloney, anyone?
I did meet with Chairman Thompson, did not meet with Chairwoman Maloney.
Okay. On August 1st, 2022, former Chairwoman Maloney and former Chairman Mr. Thompson from the Homeland Security Committee requested that you provide all communications and documents related to your office's decision not to pursue missing Secret Service text messages related to the January 6th insurrection. Did you ever provide that information to those committee chairmen?
I did in an August 23, 2022 letter to both Chairwoman Maloney and to Chairman Thompson.
You wrote a letter. Did you provide all the communications and documents related to your decision?
I provided information that was requested and not particular documents.
Okay. Well, let's the record show that you did not actually provide the requested information. Did you, were your Deputy Inspector General and your Chief of Staff requested to have transcribed interviews last August or last Congress as well?
Yes,
And did you allow them to undergo these transcribed interviews?
because of ongoing investigations, I did not permit them to be interviewed by this body.
So you just blanketly refused to permit them, even though they could, of course, come in here and say that they can't answer specific questions related to ongoing investigations.
That's correct.
Okay. You know, I find it remarkable that we are having this hearing, you know, with someone with a very clear vendetta and politicized approach to the job of an independent inspector general. If the point of your report and the point of this hearing is, as my colleague from Texas just said, because we have a problem at the border, we can all agree. And if the morale is down because there are not enough agents and officers at the border, we can all agree. The sad reality is that my colleagues on the majority have no interest in any meaningful immigration reform. They would prefer to hold hearing like this, and we have many of them in the Homeland Security Committee where they can talk about the problems, they can accuse the Biden administration of make false allegations about all of their terrible policies, and yet they don't want to actually do anything. We need more. Would you agree we need more immigration judges to decide asylum cases, Mr. Kafari?
That would be a decision that would rest with the Justice Department, who has.
That's not my question. Do you think it would help things at the border if we had more immigration judges to decide asylum claims faster?
More people will certainly help across the entire network.
That's right. And, you know, I heard it gets tiresome to continue to have these conversations. There is a tremendous migration issue in Central America. There are 2.4 million Venezuelans in Colombia. This is not particular to the United States. This is a problem that congressional effort and oversight and legislation needs to correct, yet we are not doing that. And when you hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about all the problems with fentanyl and with gotaways and with smuggling, you know what they don't ever talk about? They don't ever talk about the tremendous exportation of American-made guns to Mexican cartels that give them the power and authority to control the fentanyl trafficking into this country. My colleague from Texas just listed a whole litany of things that are the problems we're having at the border and never mentions guns. H.R. 2, Mr. Perry, was a immigration border security bill. It doesn't mention guns. It doesn't mention gun trafficking. It doesn't mention guns going from America to Mexico. If you want to talk about immigration reform and you want to fix at the border, come talk to us. Let's be real about how we can actually fix the border. I yield back.
Mr. Big.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Dr. Kafari, for being here. You know, I do think it's interesting that the last gentleman was asking you about asylum and immigration courts, but that's not in your purview, right? That's DOJ. That's not DHS, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so that was odd, I thought, but it was pretty consistent because I thought the ranking member who's sitting in there today, rather dubious. His own credibility is kind of dubious because he basically questioned this document, your report, but in so doing, he spent a good portion of his time lauding the Biden border policies. When you start lauding the Biden border policies, which is, I don't care what the pre-42 surge was, we've gone back down to the typical Biden border crisis numbers. That's where we sit today. And that's about a 5-fold increase over what Jay Johnson said was a crisis on the border. If you see 1,000 a day, he says that's a crisis. So you got about 5,000 a day. The gentleman from Long Beach says, whoa, we've got this thing back under control. Well, you don't. You just simply don't. But I will say this, your report is consistent with my on-the-ground experience and getting down to the border many, many times. I've taken the chairman down many times. I've been down there. I go down there. You just go down there. I don't take anybody with me. I'll park my car. I'll start walking along the border. See how long it takes for a Border Patrol agent to come. When they finally get there, I ask them how things are going. They tell me it ain't going good. I said, well, what do your colleagues feel? Well, they feel like they've been abandoned by this administration. The other thing I will say is you had survey responses from 16% of the entire force. Is that right?
16% of the 57,000 employees in DHS, primarily ICE and CBP, who we surveyed.
Yeah. In my studies, a large N study was typically, we thought anything over 350 to 500 was a large N study. 9,000 would be pretty persuasive. He compared it to a Twitter survey. The only difference is you had a limited universe, and if you're going to make a claim, you might say selection bias because only the people that cared enough to responded. But you had 9,000, 16% respond. Well, let's take a look here just a little bit. So can you discuss what steps your office takes when an audit or investigation is opened?
We notified the department through a transmittal memo of the opening of a project, an audit or an inspection. We let them know that we will be looking for certain documents for some communication, and we set what's called an entrance conference with the department's liaison office and the components liaison office to begin our audit or inspection work.
And when you request documents or information, what's the typical response time for an agency?
Normally, it's about 30 days to respond back to us.
Is the DHS, are they responsive typically within 30 days?
They have been on certain occasions.
What's their typical response time now?
Upwards of about, there is one project that is 140 days that we've made our request and haven't gotten the information.
So did they give you a rationale for their 5-month delay?
Not in that particular case, but they have in others.
Is a rationale for delay that they give to you, are those allowed under the Inspector General Act?
The only exception to not providing the IG that I'm aware of in the IG Act is the secretary of the department would have to make a determination that for national security or not to compromise an ongoing investigation, the department secretary would then have to make that determination.
Has Secretary Mayorkas made that determination and communicated that to you?
He would also have to communicate that to this oversight committee as well.
Has he communicated that to you?
No, sir.
He hasn't communicated that to us, as far as I know. So he's not complying with the requirements of the Inspector General Act. Is that fair to say?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, my time has expired, and I told you it'd go by fast, but Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, Congressman Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Mr. Raskin was asking you about text messages with respect to January 6th. I had some questions about some messaging. I believe it was Signal that was used, I think by you and some of your colleagues, beginning around December 13th, 2020. And this is based on an affidavit that you filed yesterday in a case that's pending. Do you recall filing the affidavit?
I do.
Okay. And in the affidavit, you talked about how there was a time where you made a switch, and others, to using Signal. Do you recall that?
I recall at the direction of DHS, Signal was placed on our government cell phones as a result of the SolarWinds compromise of the department's communication.
Okay. And who was it specifically that directed the use of Signal?
I believe it was the Chief Information Officer for the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay. And so during that time period, you used Signal for until early 2021, according to your affidavit?
I physically used Signal on one occasion in a 2-week period of time.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure you said that in your affidavit, but there came a time where you stopped using it in early 2021, according to your affidavit?
That's correct.
All right. And Signal, you may know, is an application where, in some instances, it can automatically delete the communications that are exchanged on it?
Actually, I don't know that.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. As the Inspector General, you're familiar with the Federal Records Act, right?
Yes.
All right. And so you know there's an obligation to preserve official government documents. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And electronic messaging falls under that category, isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, according to your affidavit, all of those whatever those messages were all deleted. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect.
Okay. They're not preserved.
No, what I'm saying is that the one instance that I did use Signal, it was an oral communication telephone call with the members of the Department of Homeland Security. I believe it was their breach response team. That's the one and only instance that I ever used Signal.
Okay. Well, did your organization, did your department respond that none of the messages on Signal were preserved in the filing from yesterday from the U.S. Attorney's Office?
I don't believe there were messages. There was an oral communication, not text messages or anything to my knowledge. At least in my case, I only used it once as I described.
All right. Well, let me read this to you. However, until that time, the Signal messaging application was not approved for use on DHS devices. However, I was one of a small number of users authorized to install the application on my OIG-issued cell phone for the limited purpose of discussing via secure means the response to the above described apparent breach of DHS computer networks. So that's the messaging you're talking about?
That's the oral communication, not a message. I just want to be clear with the committee.
Okay, and then in the next paragraph down, you said, no more than a few weeks after installing the Signal application, I deleted Signal from my OIG-issued cell phone because I no longer had use for it.
That's
correct?
Yes.
Okay, so any messages that are unavailable were not based on you deleting anything. That's just, they were not preserved in some way?
No, what I'm saying, just to be clear, Congressman, I did not use Signal to do messaging. I used it to do a telephone call at the request of DHS.
All right. And there was nothing was done to preserve anything with respect to those telephone calls?
I don't, unless we had a Title III or some other electronic intercept of my oral communications, I don't believe there would be a message that would be preserved.
All right. Let me ask you this question. With respect to the January 6th documentation from the Secret Service? All right. And there was a 14-month delay before you notified Congress that of that issue with respect to the deletion of the Secret Service texts?
Just to be clear, I answered that question previously, and it's not 14 months. We learned that DHS deleted all the email, all the text messages from the Secret Service phones. We learned that in February of 2022.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Now I have Mr. Perry.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kafari, as often is the case, I'm left with correcting, clarifying the record in these hearings. Comprehensive immigration reform, as decried by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, is generally known and perceived rightly so as amnesty for breaking America's laws. Therefore, that they lament the fact that we're not interested in allowing people that come across our border illegally, bringing fentanyl, engaged in human trafficking, gang activity. We're not interested in providing amnesty for their lawlessness. So no, there is not going to be comprehensive immigration reform because that's what it includes. Just let the record reflect that. Regarding my colleague who complained about the rape of his constituent and the fact that it seemed like the person that was deported had more rights than she did, I would just remind my colleague on the other side of the aisle that they support that. They've supported that in all the cities that they run across the country and at the southern border. They support that lawlessness. And so it's rich for him to come in and complain on her behalf when he and his party have been aiding and abetting it for years upon years. And Mr. Goldman says that we don't want to talk about guns. We're happy to talk about Fast and Furious, where that party, his party, took guns across the border to Mexican cartels that were used to kill Americans trying to protect this border. But they didn't want to talk about it. Eric Holder didn't want to talk about it, was held in contempt, and they still don't want to talk about it. And it's rich for Mr. Goldman to talk about you promoting falsehoods while he sat at the front and center of impeachment of a president based entirely on falsehood, which he was well aware of at the time and is well aware of right now. I know, you're laughing it up over there, aren't you? You're laughing it up because you're full of perfidy. Lies and more lies and more lies. Mr. Kafari, it's been alleged or averred that more people would make it better. More people, more Border Patrol agents. Mr. Goldman said more judges. More would make it better. Here's what also would make it better, I think. If less people were allowed to cross the border illegally, would that make it better?
That certainly would help, yes.
If there were less people crossing illegally, would we need more judges to deal with those less people crossing illegally?
You would need more judges to process people who were claiming asylum.
Right, but they're crossing illegally and claiming asylum based on their illegal crossing. The point is, yeah, we can hire as many as we want to, but as long as you're going to let more and more and more unstoppable people coming across the border illegally, you're never going to have enough. The solution is not to hire more people. The solution is to stop the people from coming across illegally. That's the solution. To get you to say that the solution is actually to hire more people belies the fact that people are coming across illegally because of the policies of my friends on the other side of the aisle, and no other reason. For no other reason. Was the border ever manageable before without hiring more people? Let me answer that question. Was it ever manageable before without hiring more people?
According to my personal experience, it was manageable starting in 1994.
You did a survey, 9,300 and change, 16% of the total population surveyed, much more than most of the polls that this operation runs to determine public opinion about who's going to vote for what. And you're being criticized here today for the survey. And some Border Patrol agents said that local management would transport migrants out of the facility before a visit and return them after the visit ended. Why would they do that? Why would that happen?
I can't answer that, sir. That's
I don't know.
individuals.
Hazard a guess.
Let me say, in my experience, I didn't see that happen.
Well, how would you see it happen? How would you see it happen if they moved them before you got there and moved them back after you left? How would you see it happen?
We also do unannounced inspections when they don't know that we're coming to a particular
Right.
detention.
But still, you don't know that, right? But these are Border Patrol agents saying it. Are Border Patrol agents signing up for overseeing meal delivery, restocking snacks and hygiene products? Is that why people want to secure the border? Is that the job that they're looking for when they sign up and say, I want to be a Border Patrol agent, I want to replenish the snack supply for people coming across illegally? Is that like the number one request on their list of job assignments?
That's the frustration that they described.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance.
Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kufari, the Office of Personnel Management's Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey is a tool for federal agency employees to provide feedback on how engaged they are in their work. When people are engaged at work, they're more effective at their jobs, they perform the work more efficiently, and part of a principal's job is keeping their team engaged. In other words, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Surveys can reveal what leadership techniques are working for agency executives and which ones are not. In fact, Mr. Kufari, you regularly tout your office's Federal Employee Viewpoint S-score since you've taken over as Inspector General. In May 2022, in a letter to this committee, you highlighted portions of your office's survey data from 2020 and 2021 that apparently show improvement in employee engagement. And in an email you sent to all your staff in December 2022 that I have here, you again highlighted improvements in your agency's 2022 survey data. Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an email between Inspector General Kufari and his office lauding the importance of Federal Employee Viewpoint survey scores.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Kufari, do you agree that the Federal Employee Viewpoint survey data are important indicators for how an agency is performing?
Yes.
That's right. And in the past, you have said that they document progress. However, in the most recent survey data shows that a majority of the people in your office do not believe that their senior leadership maintains high standards of honesty and integrity. 66% of your employees. Mr. Kufari, are you a senior leader?
Yes.
Mr. Kufari, are you aware that nearly half of the employees in the Office of Inspection and Evaluations fear retaliation if they disclose suspected violation of laws, rules, or regulation?
You're asking if I'm aware of it?
Are you aware of that? Are you aware of the
That's-
fact that 40% compared to 43% who don't?
No, sir.
Yes, that's a reality through the survey that you tout. Mr. Kufari, how about the fact, do you know about the fact that less than half of your staff in the Office of Counsel feel like they can safely disclose suspected wrongdoing?
Yes.
You are aware of that. Only 45% feel like they can disclose that. I find this incredibly alarming, especially when coupled with the fact that you've run away from any efforts to conduct oversight in your office, using taxpayer money, $1.4 million, to contract a law firm to run away from accountability on your part. And you know, I've seen weak leaders run from accountability before. In my home state of Florida right now, Governor Ron DeSantis is saddling taxpayers with billions in legal fees to defend his unlawful policies with his intimidation, his removal of dissenting officials. He's taking major losses on the backs of taxpayers because private sector officials called out his disastrous agenda. And the Florida legislature has approved a whole new budget to pay for all of his legal losses. But he doesn't want to answer for that. And I admit, at this point, many of us realize that DeSantis gets an F in accountability. However, inspectors general are meant to serve as a safe haven for whistleblowers. How is a whistleblower supposed to trust your office when members of your own staff don't even feel safe to report wrongdoing themselves? I yield to Mr. Ivey.
Mr. Kufari, I'm sorry, I had one question left, or a couple questions left. This is with respect to text messages, with respect to your government-issued iPhone.
Yes.
Did you delete text messages from your government-issued iPhone?
Yes.
Okay. And well, when was that?
It's my normal practice to delete text messages.
So you delete them on an ongoing basis?
That's correct.
All right. Are they stored anywhere?
Jim?
Not sure?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, it's safe to say based on that at the time you deleted them, you didn't know if they were stored in an alternative place. Is that fair?
Correct. It's
All right.
also fair to note that I don't use my government cell phone to conduct official business.
All right. So your testimony today is that these text messages that you have deleted, or at least some of them, had no federal information or any information that would be implicated under the Federal Records Act.
Under the Federal Records Act, that's correct.
Okay. And so they have no connection to official business at all?
Nothing that would be considered a federal record.
Well, are you using your federal phone for personal purposes then?
No, sir.
All right. Then what's the purpose for using your government-issued phone?
To conduct business.
But not federal business related to your department?
Not federal business, considering that they are records. It's a clearly defined statute that places requirements on what a federal record actually is.
All right.
So
So just final question. So you've made a conscious decision with the documents or the messages you've deleted that the federal records laws did not apply to the messages you deleted.
The messages that I deleted, I did not consider those to be federal records, and therefore I deleted them. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't know we were going to be debating 2024 presidential candidates this morning, but welcome to Congress.
Thank you.
In 2019, there were just under 17,000 border agents handling an average of 71,000 monthly encounters. As of 2022, border agents decreased to 16,654, but average monthly encounters rose to around 184,000 encounters. In that time, it's no coincidence there was over a 300% increase in known gotaways. Border agent morale is low, border agent retention is low, and this administration's ability to follow the rule of law is simply in the gutter. I'm very proud of South Carolina. At FLETC, we train Border Patrol agents. I've been to one of their graduations. I know that they put a lot on the line. They work hard. And so the purpose of this hearing today is to talk a little bit about that. Speaking on the condition of anonymity, one agent said, under Biden, things are the worst they have ever been by far. Agents are calling in all the time. You always hear, it doesn't matter. What's the point? Agents are afraid of ending up on the news for doing their job or getting in trouble for just doing their job, and there is no morale. Mr. Kafari, yes or no, is this the same type of sentiment you found when visiting the southwest border from our Border Patrol agents?
Border Patrol agents have expressed similar comments to me and to my staff.
Do you think it's the worst it's ever been for their morale?
It's been significantly increased since I started with my federal civil service in 1993.
Okay, my next question, do you find agents have become apathetic as their concerns and workplace issues are not being addressed? Are they sort of apathetic when you've talked to them?
They express frustration. I must say that the Border Patrol and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents do a great job every single day of the year, and they're just frustrated.
They work very hard, don't they?
They do.
When you speak with Border Patrol agents, do they blame agency leadership? Do they blame the administration, or both, or the status of the border? I mean, who do they blame for this?
They express frustration with both.
All right. Mr. Kafari, I just want to thank you for your time today. I appreciate your work regarding the sad state of affairs that is the Border Patrol agents' morale. I think it's very clear and evident today. It doesn't take a 65-page report to realize something is wrong. It's self-evident. It's undeniable. Thank you for answering my questions today. While my colleagues on the other side of the aisle knew this was a problem, their goal has always been to punish or push our Border Patrol issues to the brink of unsustainability. And that's where we are today. What we are doing along our southern border border is completely unsustainable. It's a consistent strategy. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And unfortunately, this plan has come at the expense of deadly journeys for migrants, vilification of our border agents, and a less safe country for American citizens. Last year, or last Congress, when the left had the House, they had the Senate, they had the White House on this committee, I remember having one hearing about the border. And it was about the northern border, where we were getting less than 10,000 illegal immigrants coming across the northern border every year. And today, we saw even last year and over the growth of illegal immigrants coming and crossing over the southern border daily. It just far surpasses. And I hope that Republican leadership can hold this administration accountable. Thank you, and I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. LaTurner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Kafari, for being here today. America's Border Patrol agents put their lives on the line to secure our border and halt the flow of illegal immigrants, drugs, weapons, and human trafficking from entering our country. For far too long under this administration, these brave men and women have been understaffed and without adequate resources to do their job effectively, and that needs to change. Between fiscal years 2020 and 2022, your recent report found the number of Border Patrol agents guarding the southwest border fell slightly, while monthly encounters with illegal aliens spiked by a staggering 450%. Your report also found that FY 2022 set the record for migrant deaths, with more than 800 migrants dying while attempting to cross the southwest border. These are not just statistics, they represent a very real crisis at the border that remains unaddressed by the Biden administration. Unsurprisingly, 88% of ICE and CBP agents you surveyed said their duty locations are not adequately staffed to handle the surge of people streaming across our border. And to further compound the problem, 24% of respondents said they plan to leave their respective agencies within the calendar year. It's a dangerous and demanding job in the first place, and it's clear from your reporting that morale amongst our border agents is lower than ever before. One agent testified that due to a significant shift in immigration policies from the prior administration, it feels like they are trying to do their job, quote, with one hand tied behind their back. Mr. Kufari, amongst the agents you surveyed, which policy changes did they say most hindered their efforts to protect our border?
The unknown, lawsuits, there's just a whole wide variety of concerns.
Would the current number of agents be better able to maintain control of the southwest border if Remain in Mexico was still in place?
More individuals certainly would help stem the flow of illegal immigration.
I understand that, but the Remain in Mexico policy, if that was still in place, would that help them maintain control of the southwest border? From the people that, your observations.
I can't speak to the policy decisions.
You concluded your report with 3 recommendations to remedy the staffing shortage at CBP and ICE. The Biden administration agreed with 2 of them, but rejected the first under the premise the agency's staffing models are already sufficient and that your report did not recognize all the DHS initiatives to support its personnel. Do you agree with that assessment?
No.
According to your report, between fiscal year 2019 and 2022, there was a 303% increase in known gotaways. Is this occurring because there are no agents available to respond?
According to the agents who were on the border, yes.
Your report details that at one southwest border station, 15% of gotaways in a 5-day period occurred because no agents were available to respond. How common of an occurrence is that?
It's, to my knowledge, it's a weekly occurrence.
What impact does the staffing shortage have on efforts to combat human trafficking, drug smuggling, and other illicit activities?
A negative impact.
Given the increasing demand for cybersecurity expertise, what steps is the department taking to recruit and retain individuals with specialized skills in this area?
I believe the department implemented a HR program to provide additional funding, like an enhancement to basic salary for those types of career fields, those jobs that relate to that.
Are there any partnerships or collaborations with educational institutions or industry to enhance recruitment that you know of specifically?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Your report also detailed CBP and ICE's use of details and overtime as a staffing mechanism. how efficient is this from a budget perspective? And is this an approach that is the best use of taxpayer money?
It's driving a huge cost in terms of expenditures of money to the department.
My time's about to expire, but I just want to thank you for being here today. I know you've put up with a lot from the other side of the aisle, and the reason that I'm so pleased with you being here and the way in which you've conducted yourself is because you've given short answers that center on the facts and the truth as you have observed it. And I appreciate that. You can ask any of my colleagues up here. You know you're getting the runaround when answers are really, really long and don't allow for you to get to all the questions that you have. So I appreciate you being here today, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Porter?
Hello, Inspector General Kufari. I want to ask you about the Office of Intelligence and Analysis. Are you aware of a domestic intelligence program under OIA that allowed Homeland Security individuals to interview just about anyone in the United States to gather human intelligence?
I believe we have an audit into that.
You have an ongoing audit?
I believe.
When was it initiated?
We're going to have to get back to you, ma'am.
Have you conducted any other oversight of this program? The Overt Human Intelligence Collection Program specifically?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of this Politico article from March 6th of this year? DHS has a program gathering domestic intelligence and virtually no one knows about it?
I'm not certain that I have seen that one.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter this into the record. This program gives government officials broad discretion to interview any civilian for any reason that they want. Does it concern you that some employees working in this program are so worried about the legality of their actions that they wanted legal liability insurance?
That would certainly be a concern.
Are you aware of the workings of this program?
No.
Given that it made national news multiple times, why have you not undertaken an audit of this program in the past?
As I mentioned, I'm going to have to get back to you, ma'am, about when we did or didn't open an audit. I'm not certain.
Let me, as you go about that work, let me give you some facts. There was a survey in 2020. There were 126 respondents. So this is three years ago. Half of the respondents said they'd alerted managers of about their concerns that their work involved activity that was inappropriate or illegal. Are you aware of this survey?
No.
The slide deck put together by the department responded to this fact that half of all respondents said they were concerned their work was inappropriate or illegal. The slide deck said, quote, "There is an opportunity to work with employees to address concerns they have about the appropriateness or lawfulness of a work activity." Do you think it's appropriate for your agency to work with employees about their concerns about lawfulness, or do you think that your office should be making sure the program is actually lawful?
The program that you described, it appears to be at main DHS and not within the office of the Inspector General.
Correct, but you, as the Inspector General, sir, is your job not to do oversight of main DHS?
Oh, most certainly.
Okay, so I'm asking you about a program of DHS, and I'd like to know why you haven't conducted any oversight of it at this time.
I thank you for making us aware of it.
You were not aware.
I was not.
Are you aware that this program was interviewing incarcerated individuals without their counsel present?
No, ma'am.
Is that constitutional?
It's unconstitutional.
So can I have you promise that you will conduct an investigation into this program?
You have my commitment that if we don't have an ongoing audit, we will look into the matter that you're describing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kafari. I yield back.
Okay. In closing, I'd like to thank our panelists once again for their our panelist for his important and insightful testimony. I'll yield to Ranking Member Garcia for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of my colleagues today for their hard work and certainly to holding our witness accountable for the long history of partisan and improper behavior, for the mishandling of the January 6th investigation, and for his inability to do his critical, important job to its standards. I want to remind the committee that this whole hearing is premised on a non-statistical survey and an opinion article that's disguised as serious oversight. The report is, and I want to quote again, a non-statistical survey, end quote, that, quote again, cannot be projected to the entire population of CBP and ICE law enforcement officers and agents. This is, again, a report that would not hold muster in any serious survey work. Now, without making this hearing a lesson on statistical methods and data integrity, if you're not willing to put in place data controls or use the foundational basics of statistics, you're left with the equivalent of a Twitter poll or a Yelp review. Now, I spent some time studying statistical methods when I did my doctoral work, and this work in this report would never be accepted in a basic stats class. This isn't about data from the Department of Homeland Security, as you claimed in response to my earlier question. This is about the methods that you chose to publish publicly to push a political argument. This report indicates that you knew the fundamental problems with the report, yet you published it anyway. Now, our committee relies on the work of dedicated inspector generals to root out against waste, fraud, and abuse. I also just want to note, and this was actually a very important note from earlier in the hearing, that I am extremely concerned that today, in front of our committee, that, and by the way, that oversees the Federal Records Act, that you admitted to deleting federal records based upon your own determination. That should concern the chairman and this entire committee. Now, I personally have no confidence in your ability to hold up the mission that you are intended to do. Now, coming here with a study that doesn't meet the basic standards of data reliability by your own admission should be an embarrassment. An inspector general who does not understand his own duties, who resists basic congressional oversight, who is deleting federal records, who is under investigation, and who has lost the faith of his workforce has no business serving. And before I close, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a letter to both the chairman and myself from the Project on Government Oversight, dated June 6, 2023, that speaks to the continued concerns with the Inspector General and how his inability to perform his job is preventing independent oversight. And I also ask unanimous consent to include into the record a letter from September 2022 from concerned DHS staff representing every program office at every level to the President, detailing the IG's troubling management of the office, and I want to quote his disastrous leadership. With that, I yield back.
Okay, so ordered. I think we have kind of a lack of common sense here. As Congressman Biggs said, he's had me down on the border probably 6 or 7 times by himself. I've been down there at other times. We have a situation which, depending on the metric, contacts at the border, gotaways at the border, people crossing into the border, unaccompanied minors. The number of people coming here is, say, 8 to 10 times what it was 2 years ago. So common sense will tell you what the morale is of the Border Patrol. When you have that many more people coming across, you obviously have a hard time doing your job. A lot of these people are little children. When I'm down there, the Border Patrol complains about having to kind of be a babysitter instead of doing what they signed up to be, which is a law enforcement agency. They uniformly, by the way, say the biggest problem is not the lack of personnel, though they say the lack of personnel is a big problem. The biggest problem is the policies of the Biden administration, and that they got rid of the Remain in Mexico policy. And no matter how many people they have down there, as long as they have this asylum policy, a huge number of people are going to come in here. Another thing that frustrates them is the degree to which the Mexican cartels run the border. Last time I was down there, me and Congressman Biggs ran into 21 people coming here from Mexico. The reason they came there, and the Border Patrol all knew it, is because the Border Patrol was going to have to process 21 people, including 2 kids under the age of 1, and while they were busy processing them, it opened that segment of the border, because they were understaffed, to people crossing the border with illegal drugs, which leads to over 100,000 Americans dying every year of illegal drugs. because we don't have enough people to both process people and continue to guard the border. I'll remind the minority that 9,000 people were surveyed here, but you don't need 9,000 people if you're down at the border. You talk to 10 or 20 or 30 Border Patrol agents, you all get the same thing. They're woefully understaffed, and the Biden administration, their policy when they got rid of stay in Mexico was apparently they don't care how many people are coming here, and that results in low morale because they signed up to guard our border, and they're not allowed to guard our border when you have over 100,000 people coming here. And over time, the arrogance of the people coming here just keeps getting worse. I'm struck by Border Patrol telling me, people complaining that they've got concert tickets to go somewhere next week. And come on, Border Patrol, let's go, let's go, let's go. And it's probably true, but that's what we have coming across. It's so automatic. So in any event, I hope in the near budget we get more Border Patrol agents down there so you can't just send a few families across, tie up the Border Patrol, and have people coming across with drugs that are killing Americans. I also hope somebody in the Biden administration cares about the fact that our getting rid of the stay in Mexico policy has made it so difficult for these guys to do their jobs. But in any event, I thank you for being here. I remind, with that and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and submit additional written questions for the witness, which will be forwarded to the witness for their response. If there's no further business without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.